Did you know that snake plant is actually a kind of dracena, growing in the highlands of Kenya, Zimbabwe, and also in some parts of Asia? What is interesting about this plant is that the locals use it to treat earache, snake bites, and even ulcers. Now, supposedly it's an easy to care plant, but despite that, I've often managed to mess up with it. Sometimes it just dries, sometimes the cuttings start to rot, and sometimes it just takes forever to grow. So today, I'm going to try and share whatever I have learned about caring for this plant. So first, let's talk about the growth of snake plant. How can one improve its growth? After much experimentation, I have realized that the snake plant does best in small pots. So this means you don't have to repot this plant very quickly. Now, of course, adding a fertilizer also helps, but since this plant has evolved to sustain in conditions where there's not a lot of nutrients in the soil, it can still do well without fertilizer. The main thing is that you concentrate on the size of the pot. If you're using a big pot with just a couple of leaves, these leaves will take a very long time to establish themselves in the soil, and will take a lot of time for you to see new growth coming out. Now, the second most important factor is watering. Since this is a succulent, meaning a plant that stores water in its leaves, if you keep watering it too much, when I say too much, I mean if you water it probably every 2 to 3 days also, then it's too much of water for this plant. And it'll start becoming soggy, so you don't want that to happen. Now, on the other extreme is that you don't water it at all, which is what I did with this plant. Now, when you don't water this plant at all, the first stage you would see is that the leaves are drooping and they also become very soft. And if this continues, then they'll eventually become brown and completely dry out. From this stage, there's no going back. You can't reverse this. So it's important that you keep an eye on your plant. If you see that the leaves have started drooping and they've become soft, then most likely your plant is thirsty. You need to add water to your plant. But this also happens if you're watering your plant too much. So an ideal frequency to water this plant is probably once in 14-15 days. Now for my snake plants, a couple of times I don't water them even in 20-30 days. It's still okay. But with this plant, I completely forgot to water this plant. So what went wrong for this plant is that it was kept in the bathroom we don't use so much. And I kept thinking that there's already so much humidity in the bathroom and it should be enough because it's a succulent. Now that didn't help. Why? Because I realized later it's a plastic pot. The soil cannot absorb moisture from the air. And within 50 to 60 days, it turned into something like this. Now this is irreversible. I can't do anything about it. But if your plant is in this stage, and in fact this applies for most indoor plants, if you see that the edges have started becoming brown, it's most likely that there's infrequent watering. Sometimes probably water too much and sometimes you just don't water. Or it could be that you've completely stopped watering your plant. So in both these cases, what you should do is first follow a regular regime of watering. So for snake plant, needs watering every 14-15 days and shift it to a well-lit place. Now what is a well-lit place? This room is a well-lit place. It doesn't get direct sun and neither it is dark in the daytime. It doesn't need a tube light in the daytime. So this is what we will call a well-lit room. So for most of the indoor plants, shift them to a space like this and follow a regular watering regime. This will basically help your plant to gain immunity to fight any problem that it's facing. It a lot of times could be a disease or fungal problem as well. This reminds me of something fun I read online. It said, remember to drink water and get some sun. Basically, humans are like plants just with complicated feelings. Isn't that so? Anyway, so coming back to our plants. So for this plant, you might have seen sometimes the leaves have started drooping. If all the leaves are drooping, that means there's a watering problem. But only a leaf or two is drooping, this means there's a light problem. When the plant is starving for light and is not able to carry on its normal photosynthesis process, some of the leaves start drooping. And in this case, you should shift your plant to a well-lit place. You can keep this plant for a week or 10 days in this well-lit place and then shift it back as well. But just give it a good dose of light. This will help the leaves to stand up erect again. Now, the other problem I face with this plant is its propagation. By the book, you can take a cutting, either an entire leaf, or you can cut it into 3 inches piece and propagate it in water or in soil. Now, I took a couple of cuttings about 2 weeks back and I completely failed with it. I had started them in water. About 3-4 months back, I did exactly the same, but it was successful in water. Where I went wrong was that I forgot to change the water. Now, if you are as forgetful as me, or if you're lazy, also like me, I would say then start them in soil. Start them in dry soil, take the cutting, put them in soil, and do not water. Why? Because this would increase the chances of rot. Start watering only after 3-4 days. By that time, a callus would have formed. When you propagate snake plant, it can also take about